It started with a sound he had never heard before. Haunting, deep, rising in waves like a voice calling from the heavens. It echoed over rooftops and across broken streets, carried by the morning wind like a secret being whispered to his soul. He froze. His rifle slipped slightly in his hand. His boots stood firm on unfamiliar soil, but his heart wavered for the first time. The call, so foreign, yet oddly familiar, touched something buried deep within him, something he didn't know existed. That was the moment it all changed. That was the moment the tears began to fall, and he didn't know why. Sergeant David Walker had been through war zones. He had seen things that made the strongest men break. He had buried brothers, escaped bullets, survived ambushes, and walked through streets soaked in grief. But he had never felt what he felt that morning. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't even confusion. It was something more, something ancient, something divine. He had arrived in the Middle East a month earlier. Another deployment, another mission. The orders were clear, but his heart wasn't. The chaos around him, the clash of cultures, the tension in the air, he had numbed himself to it. He had to. That's how a soldier survives. But nothing prepared him for what he would encounter. Not in combat, but in a moment of stillness. That morning, the sun had barely begun to rise when he stepped out onto the rooftop of an abandoned building. He needed air. Silence. Solitude. He had just finished writing in his journal, the one he kept hidden from the other men. In it, he spilled everything. His fears, his confusion, his questions. He was a soldier, trained to kill if necessary, to follow orders without hesitation. But in that journal, he was just a man trying to find peace. And then it happened. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The words hit him like a wave crashing against stone. He didn't understand them, not yet, but the sound of them felt holy. Not because of the language or the melody, but because of the way it pierced through the noise inside his head. It was as if the call to prayer silenced the world, and all that remained was this sound, and the truth it carried. He looked around. Across the rooftops in the distance, he could see people pausing. Some looked toward the minaret, some walked calmly toward a nearby mosque. Children stopped playing. Mothers stood still, and somehow, everything around them, everything broken, everything burning, everything loud, went quiet. For 5 minutes, the war paused, not because of peace talks or diplomacy, but because of a call, because of faith. And that's when he felt it, tears filling his eyes. They weren't tears of sadness. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of awakening. Tears that came from a place no bullet had ever touched. He dropped to one knee. He clutched his chest. Something inside him was breaking, but in the most beautiful way. He didn't know what the Adhan meant, not word for word, but he felt it. It was a call to something higher, something greater than war, greater than borders, greater than flags or politics. It was a call to God, and that shook him. Later that day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He asked a local interpreter what the words meant. The interpreter, an older man with kind eyes and a weathered face, explained with reverence. It is the call to prayer. The muezzin recites it 5 times a day to remind us, God is greater. It's how we pause our lives to return to Him. The soldier just nodded, speechless. For days, David found himself listening for the Adhan. He'd wake early, climb back onto that rooftop, and wait. And every time he heard it, he cried. Not sobbing, not weeping, just silent tears that fell without effort. He didn't understand it, but he didn't fight it either. It was like his soul had recognized something his mind was still trying to grasp. He started asking questions. What do you say in prayer? Why do you pray like that? Why do you bow and place your forehead to the ground? The interpreter smiled every time. He answered with patience. He invited David to visit a mosque. At first, the soldier hesitated. What would his fellow soldiers think? Would they mock him, question his loyalty? But something deeper overrode his fears. He went. Shoes off. Head lowered, he entered the mosque, and for the first time in his life, he felt what real peace tasted like. It wasn't in the silence of the room. It wasn't even in the prayer itself. It was in the surrender. Men from all walks of life stood shoulder to shoulder, rich, poor, young, old, black, white, no ranks, no pride, just unity, just humility. He watched them bow. He watched them whisper. He didn't know the words, but his heart followed along. Later that week, he found himself speaking to an imam, not debating, not interrogating, just listening. "I don't know what's happening to me," David confessed. "I've never felt this before." The imam nodded. "Sometimes, the heart recognizes the truth before the mind does." David began to read the Qur'an, books about Islam, stories of converts. He read about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He read about the Sahaba. He read about the mercy, the justice, the love. He read until the words stopped being foreign and started becoming familiar, like home. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, he walked into the mosque, stood beside the imam, and whispered the words that would change his life forever. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasul Allah." He said it slowly, carefully, with tears flowing freely down his face. There were no fireworks, no cameras, no applause. Just a man finding his way back to his Creator. That night, he wrote in his journal for the last time, "Today, I found peace, not through power, not through war, not through pride, but through surrender, through prayer, through God. I heard the Adhan and it called me home." He kept that entry, framed it. Years later, he returned to that country, not as a soldier, but as a brother, not with weapons, but with books, not to fight, but to teach, to share what he found. He stood in front of a group of children, and one of them asked him, "Why did you become a Muslim?" He smiled, looked up at the minaret in the distance, and whispered, "Because one day I heard a sound that made my soul cry, and I followed it," and he never looked back. Takei script natural age, J's Kissini real kahani sunne ho bina break key.